Greetings, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the official Ronnie Landis podcast show. Welcome to this. We got an episode here ready for all of you. Whether you're listening to our live Facebook stream that is happening right now, or you are listening on the podcast or YouTube, I have been away from doing live interviews for quite some time, been doing a lot of solo episodes. And have had a lot of interesting topics that have been rolling out, been having a lot of fun with that. And given current events going on in our world that all of us are well aware of, I decided it was time to bring back on some really important minds, really important perspectives, and bring some really important ideas back into the fold and start this interview series back up with some of the most brilliant minds that I have access to and that I've also interviewed multiple times. And today's episode is with Michael Tsarion. And if you recall, I've done about 3 interviews with Michael. There's only a handful of other people that I've done 3 interviews with before. And we've dove down so many different corridors of consciousness, so many different ideas, thoughts, and topics. And so I really thought to myself, what do people really need right now? And I felt that people really they need a handful of things. One thing is they need centeredness. They need groundedness. They need practicality, and they need solutions. And in order to understand what solutions we need, we actually have to understand what are the actual problems. Because when I go on social media and I look at the news broadcasting, projection making machines, if you will, I look at all the different sources of information that's being broadcasted. I look at all the different people on social media that everybody has a voice and everybody's saying something about something, putting all these different articles out there, whether that be 5G or mandated vaccines or what we might call fear porn, which it's basically become. There's so much just stuff coming out. And I realized that we need to actually get underneath this thing. Whether it's the coronavirus, whatever that is, whatever the reality behind that is, it's the political scenario, because if you go on YouTube, like I've been going on to, you're seeing this big, huge sideshow almost of just all these voices and opinions and perspectives being flung out there. And it's very easy to get confused. It's very easy to get knocked off center. And I would say, and I don't think you would probably disagree with this, Michael, that is part of the purpose, is to knock people off center, right? To keep us kind of unstable, right? So we can't quite get our thoughts together. We can't quite get ourselves together long enough to actually, make something useful happen. So anyways, with all that said, without further ado, Michael, thank you so much for joining me. And I'm excited to dive into a number of things with you.
Great, Ronnie. I agree with love your work that you're doing, and the fact that we always have interesting conversations. As you see, I don't do anything anymore, except with people I totally trust and I know are up to speed on the very things that you've said. And you're right. The world has always been 3. See, the things that we are experiencing right now are fear oriented. As long as we always realize that. It's nothing new. It's just maybe a little bit more ramped up. But basically, there's always been a kind of a condition of fear porn and, the frighteners, and by people who know that basically we're 3 meals away from revolution and who know how to exploit that. Remember, half the world is still in almost abject poverty. Another huge chunk of it is in semi-poverty. You know what I mean? So, they're already experimenting all around the world. And yeah, when something like this comes into our little Western bubble, it can be shocking because we forget how to crack a coconut, how to live on some boiled leaves and tea, and I'm glad for it in many ways, because we do need this interruption, because we get too decadent, we get too cushy, and we forget, the big screen TV rules all, and now there's a sense of, I would say, in well-meaning people, there's back to ground zero, get grounded, get back, into the home environment in a more of a warm, empathic way, set your focus again, sort of get your priorities straight. Maybe even, like I keep on suggesting DIY around the home, but I do that with a reason, because in the simple fact of doing that, you know, a whole new career for some people may open up, you know, where they might even change their whole view of being self-sufficient and self-employed, you know, pottering about. And maybe that's it. Maybe that's going to be a silver lining in a person's life down the line, as opposed to be imagining that you're going to still keep climbing through the corporate ceiling and the effort and the price you pay for doing that, you know, and perhaps even the conscience. So you may say maybe you even do it. Yeah, but what's the price on your conscience for that parking space and that cubicle and that CEO, you know, designation? Think of what is happening to your private life, your domestic life, and your conscience. You know, maybe the time has come to really revalue all of this. So, okay, there's a fiasco happening in society. To me, there's always a fiasco going on, and it has the psychological ramifications you're definitely talking about. You know, I have advocated that even, you know, while I've been back of the line, you know, falling on deaf ears, not to you, of course, you know, but the vast majority of people. My message within this alternative movement has been exactly what you just said. So I'm absolutely vindicated, you know, not that I needed it, but, you know, at the same time, you know, I'll take the laurels, you know, because I've been mentioning this time and time and time, you know, bringing up the psychology of it. And now hopefully people can at least, you know, give me that nod and say, you know, hey, Michael, you were on the button there, because, yeah, now that I'm thrust into, you know, this sort of lockdown situation, I see that a lot of what you've been saying went through one of my ears and out the other. And I've been having emails like that. So that's favorable, you know. But in general, yeah, get back to doing the home fixtures. Even if you're still working online, then organize those files. Read those books you kept on saying that you wanted to get the chance to read. Now's your chance. People have bookmarked websites probably for years, like I have, not gone back and really, or, you know, they have bookmarked hour-long podcasts that they haven't listened to, you know, on the Gnostics or, you know, on Manly Palmer Hall, on my stuff, you know. Hey, there's your chance. So nothing's really that changed for me. In fact, in many ways, it might even be, you know, a benefit. And then, as I've spoken on other shows in a different context, you know, there are moments in history when what government does isn't always a conspiracy. I know it's hard for people who've been studying assiduously, and that's their tunnel vision, and I'm one of them. But, you know, that does not change the fact that there are times when a greater threat musters on the horizon, and suddenly there's a different movement, and you have to be aware and open to that. Just like you implied earlier, hey, this could even be, you know, a legitimate epidemic, you know, like that we had during the second, you know, after the First World War, you know, with the Spanish flu. You know, there are times when this can actually happen, and so temper your paranoia, so to speak, and I mean that in mostly a good way. I mean, you know, with the fact that, look, this could indeed happen. Millions of people get together, and where millions and millions of people gather, which we call cities and societies, there can be epidemics, some severe, some not severe. You know, and then don't lose sight of the speculative idea that there's collateral damage that the government, especially the left, you know, letting out masses of prisoners, bringing up, as you say, a very dangerous ploy of the mandatory vaccinations. One always has to be aware of that, and also be aware of how to fight it. So, see, I've maintained from day one that, see, when dark time comes, when even darkness is in your life psychologically, or when it's socially, to me, it's one and the same. That strengthens your immune system. That strengthens your sovereignty. So bring it on. Our world has had Spanish flu, world wars. Our ancestors knew infinitely worse times than we know now. So if you just suddenly lose the rag and don't want to throw yourself out of a window because of this shit, maybe you need to go ahead and go ahead. Yeah. Because you know, what are you made of?
See, okay, you're bringing up some very key points here, and one of the things that just came across more kind of energetically from listening to you is your cadence around the whole situation tells me that you're not particularly worried about a massive conspiracy or what most people are. So in other words, I brought up in the beginning of this, you know, there's all these articles, right? There's all, you know, if you go on social media, there's a massive amount of things around 5G, right? And that is a reality. Nobody's saying that isn't. We've been talking about that for a while, right? But now it's like, it's supposedly being rolled out. There's all these articles. if you go to the articles, some of them are outdated, some of them are happening now. It's kind of a mishmash. The same thing with the mandated vaccines and whatever else, there's so many different examples. My perspective, and you just said something really interesting, I just want to reiterate for everybody's nervous system, basically, just to calm the system a little bit, is, first of all, we don't really know, right? The information that we're getting is so downstream from what's actually happening behind the scenes, what's actually happening. We actually have to be a little more humble, right? We actually have to practice a little more, whatever the word is, temperance. I think you mentioned that, right? Like tempering with all this information that's coming out, and who on social media among our friends or associates or people that are throwing this information, how much are they really in the know? Or is this just fragmented information that's being flung out there? And is there a purpose behind it to disorient our energy field, or just our mind, let's say, our ability to critically think, in other words?
You nailed it, man. Yeah, because all of that is true. And what I like to do is just go back to fundamentals to say that society is already an agent of disorientation. The will of the masses is already discombobulated you till you don't know if you're coming or going. The will of other people you may even live with. It's more benign, but at the same time, it's still a will imposing your own. So, there's so many things to get into there. And you're quite right. Yeah, I salvage some of it because I do know there are people I trust expert-wise who've done a bit more research, a lot more than I have. And yeah, the preponderance of trust is on them because they're academics. This or that guy was a professor. This guy or that guy is a top MD. He's worked in the hotspots of the world, in Africa, in Italy. Yeah, I'm going to believe, or they've already written on it. So it's not just something they're catering to this moment.
Yeah, I'm right there with you on that.
Yeah, and I go, listen, I'm going to listen to that.
That's a good point. I don't want to cut you up. I just want to emphasize one quick thing. What you just said, we're not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. And even what I just said, I'm not trying to make it black or white. There's important information that's coming, but we have to suss out the source of the information, the date on these articles. I just noticed when you go and you see all these different articles, it triggers that limbic system, right? Just by seeing the suggestive message that's on the article versus like, oh, wait a minute, that was like 2 years ago. Wait, that has nothing to do with right now, but it triggers that fight, flight, or freeze kind of response. So I just wanted to emphasize that there are actual credible scientists and professionals that are not in the consensus media, that are out there in the front lines, but are not getting the spotlight that maybe we should listen to. But then there's a lot of weird information out there that maybe is not useful. That's all I wanted to mention. I didn't want to cut you off.
Oh, no, you're quite right. You're quite right. And remember, oh yeah, and that thing about hermeneutics, and exegesis, actually looking at the text, looking at what is headlined, look at a subhead and read it with a critical, that is almost 75% your salvation. Looking at dates, looking at chronology, looking at the status of the person, their history. And then don't forget also, look back at I don't know if people remember during the AIDS crisis, when you had whistleblowers like Dr. Robert Strecker, who actually had worked on producing AIDS and could come out in 1 hour, like tell you the whole history of it, saving you the lifetime of study and getting caught up in the whirlwind of all the secondary sources, well-meaning as they may be. Hone in on the man. Here we actually got the man, who actually did whistleblow. And you will always find those characters. They're coming out now, and then look at other people who've made that a speciality. There's certain people who, you see, it's easy for me because I've bookmarked and I go, even in times of hotspots, I'm constantly revisiting those scholars that I know to trust on, well, whatever it may be, almost obscure stuff. But there's also people, of a school that have been tracking something for years, like satanic symbolism or whatever it may be. I'm visiting them repeatedly. So I know exactly where to go. It's like a blindfold, with a phone book. So when I need a port of call, I know who to go to. Not that I'm endorsing them all and saying they're all 1-to-1, 100% perfect, like, some Yoda. No. I may disagree with a great deal of what other things that these people are into. But at least I know that in a state of, when I need to know what road I need to go on, I don't care about the rest of the map and what it says. I'm just looking at how do I get to the A4 from here to there? And usually that's what most of us are doing here. You don't need to take on a gigantic, corpus. You don't need to get bent out of shape. You go step by step, you go systematically, you don't gorge. There's no reason for obesity in terms of knowledge. You do like Sherlock Holmes does, you give yourself the time, and also maybe, this whole thing about time management, something we can touch on, because it's another feature of what's happening today, and I think why it's throwing people for a loop. But just to stick with what we're saying, it's vitally important that when it comes to sacred knowledge, which is what I think this is, including the political aspect of it, you must allot yourself the space and the time. You must work completely different than as you do, when you're in traffic, heading to the cubicle and working with everybody else. Those are needed because that's functional. This information is functional to a degree, but it's infinitely more than that. And therefore, there's resistance in the mind. Part of our mind, right, knows that there's spiritual implications to these kinds of things that happen. So it throws a lot of dust in your eyes. It throws a lot of sticks in the spokes, hoping that you'll give up, because it knows that what I've been saying since the beginning of my career, this is a spiritual process. Yet don't you think your own mind knows that, the social mind? It doesn't want you even opening up these doors. It doesn't want you researching it. So when a panic happens, well, then there's all of these different, fallback positions and closing off and feeling fatalistic. I'm looking at all of that. I'm looking at the men who built the West are now crumbling and crying and having panic attacks. Right. Something's wrong with that. Right. Stand the fuck up. It doesn't matter what's coming at you.
Right.
Brave it out heroically. Things like that. These are the true fallback positions. And then as part of that, educate yourself. One would have to do it if they lost everything and needed to learn how to put up a fish net to survive. So you're always in a state of survival. Survival never goes away, no matter how many perks and refrigerators and big screen TVs that society throws at you. You are always 3 meals away from revolution and from meltdown. This is a perfect time to remind people of that dictum, so that they never forget. Don't all the cushions and all the cotton wool that's thrown at you to make you think you're in some Apollonian utopia. No, this is a nice knock on the nut. This is a real nice example of, you could be out there on all fours, mate, with a sheep.
Yeah, that's a brilliant perspective that you're bringing up. Essentially, what I'm hearing you talk about is the value of stress testing your reality and seeing where the weak links in your structure are, and also breaking down the false sense of security, right? Because that's our society, isn't it? That's the entire deck of cards that every institution, whether it's the financial, economic system, it's the agricultural system, it's the medical system, the governmental, political, religious, the military systems, all of these things, and I'm talking somewhat figuratively because these are real structures, obviously, but when we say the economic system and the food system in particular, the medical system, these are the things that are experiencing the most stress, right, realistically. And these are the things, particularly the economic system, that have been on a house of cards that is like all just falling apart within the overwhelm of the current situation. Whatever the real situation is, right? There's a lot of different perspectives. We can go into that. But ultimately, what I'm hearing you talk about is translating the macro, the bigger situation, kind of the wider global situation, to the micro, which is our own life. How are we responding to the perceived pandemic, the perceived crisis outside of us, and how is that affecting the internal structure of our own life? Because it's only through the stress test that we actually see what can actually withstand. And that's where our cognitive biases and our mental disassociations start to, either where our head is in the sand, like, no, I don't want to see it. Nope, sorry, can't look at that. And that's going to break down through the pressure of reality, cracking down on the illusions that we might have set up through false security.
Absolutely it does. That's a really great way of putting it, actually, because and people just being unconscious of that fact. See, the city life, the urban life is completely artificial. You have to dig down, way down deep into its structure to find anything really authentic, because it actually does. If you go really, really deep, right? It's the Midwelt coming out of the Umwelt. There's philosophical precedents for the growth of any society to our level of sophistication. But that's the infrastructure that's way down hundreds of feet. The rest of it is just a mess, right? And it's built, all this nonsense about pluralism and multiculturalism and all the things that they've done, right? Even your concepts of republic, because of one of the structures you're speaking about is government, is the whole state apparatus. Well, that's meant to be based in America, at least on republic. And that's meant to be based on the guarantee of the Constitution and Bill of Rights. Right. If I look at those documents with you for 5 minutes, we'll see nothing but holes. Right? Not that I'm saying it was ever meant to be perfect. I'm just stating the phenomenological fact that thing is full of holes, and yet their whole state is based on it. And if it was a democracy, that would be full of holes, and a logical person can see holes in it within 5 minutes. And we all know this. So there you find what you're talking about, that we know actually very little about the nature of imperfection. Right? Because Hegel was wrong, don't you know? He was a proto-fascist. And all the rest of it. So we don't know dick about evil or about imperfection. Because if we did founding fathers and parchment idolatry besides, we'd have had some real serious corrections, you see, from the start. But what we've done is we've deified these leaders because and why do we deify? Well, it's back to that whole idea of needing the totemic father. And so wherever that totemic father appears, even in his bullet holes and imperfections, we choose not to see them. And we say, no, Allah is what it's all about, right? And Yahweh and all the rest of it, right? And we get into lockstep behind the shadow of that all-father. And it's the same thing with parchment idolatry. It's the same thing with economics. It's the same with John Dewey and his perfect educational system. It's the same thing with the AMA and the founding, of that. I'm talking about the FDA and the whole pharmaceutical bullshit, right? It's the same in religion. It's Jesus, right? You see what I'm saying? Yeah. So there's already imperfection at the very base of all the constituents, right? It's like a Nordic mythology. They talk about a little snake or whatever that's gnawing away at the very roots of the tree Yggdrasil, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, there is. Mm-hmm. They're right. The thing was built out of the most perfect idealism of whoever, right? Mm. And then a Keats comes, a de Tocqueville comes, and they go, yeah, nice in theory, folks, but lots of trouble, right? Because the thing had all the perfect mental equations, but in practical, in the practical construction, huge mental fatigue, because we don't know enough about imperfection, because our entire rationalist system from the time of Descartes and before has been completely erroneous when it comes to man and his relationship, not only with nature, the cosmos, but his own body. Mm. And so my work is primarily that. Yeah, I dabble with other things, that's important, but in my actual work, where the great effort is gone, where the real walking over, cut glass has been, is to try and enter into this territory and pull teeth, getting people to realize these fundamental issues when it comes to what you actually know about the nature of time, the nature of your body. Are you listening to it? Right? Yeah. Have you got the silence that's even required to listen to? Well, no, you don't, because that's one of the urban society's foibles. It will never give you the space. It will never give you the time. It will never allow you the aloneness. And even if it sees you trying to enter into it for 5 minutes by picking up a little book on a spinner rack, you will then find your life melting down. Even if you tested it, even if you have a test for yourself, watch the shit and chaos that immediately manifests the moment that you even try to initiate and implement any of the things that we're talking about.
That's a really interesting perspective, and I don't know exactly where we would go with that other than just commenting on what you just said. Like, if you attempt to do the slightest thing that's outside of maybe it's the conditioning of the subconscious mind, it's the patterning of the behavior that we take on and the constructs that we take on as far as like our own personality and our identity construct in relation to society, the status quo, how we fit into all that. And if you've been really well patterned into that, and then you voluntarily attempt to do something like read a book or, whatever, there is some kind of weird inner tension, right? There is some kind of weird, there's almost like a psychic And I'll probably save this perspective for later in the conversation, just keep this simple, but there's some kind of tension there where the action is so simple, whether it's like, I want to drink a green juice, or I want to do something for my health, I want to do that fitness thing, and it's logical. There should not be a tension. There should not be a resistance. It's just like, yeah, I've been thinking about this thing for a long time, and I'm going to translate this to where we are right now, because this brings up really the point about the opportunity that you brought up in the beginning of this. We have a massive opportunity as individuals to pursue something other than going to work every day. We have space, but within that space, there's a weird dilemma, which is, oh, I have to be with myself. I have to be with that resistance. And so what are we going to do with this space? In other words, are we going to use this as an opportunity to obsessively go on the internet and stay on our devices and look up every conspiratorial thing, or stay tuned to the nightly news and the media magic making marketing machine and just get every little bit of information, right? Get even more addicted to our devices? Or are we actually going to take this opportunity to go within, or to do the basic things that maybe we have been putting off? Those are some ideas, but I just want to take it back to this idea of that resistance, that point that I just brought up, and get your perspective on that.
Yeah, well, it's a neuroscientifically accepted thing, and it's been known long before that science came to bear, that we have a divided brain, and that the left hemisphere operates like a sensor. And the left hemisphere is really nothing more than a transmitter receiver to the will of the many, the will of the collective, to society, right? It's a society in our head. And that's where the resistance comes from. The rest of us is only too happy, you see, to have that rest, to have that silence, but we're not attuned to it. We're actually become enemies of our own self, because we've read from the script. Our entire life is in lockstep with the script of the many. The most evil institution in the world is the collective. That's the masses, right? We're part of it, or until you go through purification processes where you're not part of it, right? And even physically removing yourself, say, to a more natural environment and all that. But most people don't know anything about that, and therefore, you see, the whole trap of the left brain is that it anesthetizes you so that you don't even know what's wrong, right? All that is evil and all that is wrong is invisible. It's made invisible by its proximity. It hides behind the veil, so you're not even aware that there's anything wrong to be critiqued. You're not self-reflexive. You're not listening to your body and its pains, and and you're not listening. You're not fathoming where that great weight is coming from, or where that lethargy, the blocks you're talking about. You're not able to phenomenologically turn and self-reflect. You have no concept of introspection. You've never exercised what I call centroversion, which is, returning to how you feel about a person, a thing, a state of mind, right? There's no form. America is a culprit. This is one thing that America is, culturally missing. It tried to bring it in through some different, boogaloo groups like the New Age and all, but even then it failed, because as much as it brings in, it pushes something else out. So, and I was part of that for more years, you can imagine, and could only find it wanting. It's kind of what sort of helped. Well, yes, it was definitely one of the pillars that helped me launch my career and to make myself so bloody sarcastic. Well, after 30 years of going through what I'd gone through, you'd be sarcastic. And people fault me on that. But again, geez, they haven't seen what I've seen. So there is that element as well. Not that to say there's not also a great deal of good in all of that, and very well-meaning people. But there's also this reality distortion. There's also this dissociation that if I close my eyes, the tiger won't see me. And we're that primitive. And probably will be 1,000 years from now. Our words will just be, meaningless, because there's certain fundamental, there's certain fundamental cognitive dissonance that really is impossible to shift. You look at people who are caught in a religion, no matter how many preposterous things you point out about it, what the hell, they're going to go for it every time. You could tell them that Jesus was the Sun King and nothing but the Sun King, and they'll just go, yeah, that's all paganism. I'm a Christian. I don't need to think about it. What do you do to that? And you'll find that you are now chasing your tail meaninglessly, and so on. But one of the other factors I definitely wanted to touch on is that during any kind of thing like this, when back in the time of the Blitz, people in London and England were forced to go down into the railway subways and into different kinds of shelters and all of that, right? And they got away from it by singing and just, lighting up a song and just waiting it out and all the rest of it. But the thing is that there's been many times in history when this kind of thing does in fact happen. And what it does is it highlights, right? Like you're talking about, it now highlights all of those existential areas which you've let go. And it sort of brings them to bear now. They're like the elephant in the room, But, and also one of these things that it brings to bear is what I've always referred to as the economy of time, right? I think that one of the most important existential things is how the day will now be used. How people are now afloat on the ocean of time, how little relationship they have with time. Because when you are institutionalized, when the superego, which is an equivalent, the psychological equivalent of the left brain, is guiding you with that script, with that manual, with that A to Z manual, then you know where your parking place is, you know what your daily schedule is, and you're abusing time. And you're abusing temporality because it's not yours. You haven't made it your own. It's everybody's. Right? It's what is known in German as das Mann. It's everybody's. It's the everyone calendar or schedule. Christmas is at Christmas, Mother's Day is at Mother's Day, I've got the birthdays, and we got this ceremony and Father's Day and Mother's Day. And we arrange the clock so that we don't have to actually experience time at all. And when some people ask me, Michael, how do you do all the work you do? And how do you find the time? I don't find it. I made it. I'm not going to get all the details, but I was able to manipulate, I use that word in a positive way, manipulate time so that things I needed to get done that were part of my vocation got done, right? And no sacrifice was too small. Now, I'm not asking people to start doing that, but as I say, just observe in the early instances how time has abandoned you. Because when you abandon it, it abandons you. And then you won't step out of mediocrity. You won't get that book written. You won't get, those things organized. You won't have that thought taking through beautifully from its inception, through its middle, through its contradictions, and then to its conclusion. You won't ever experience that in your life. What you will experience, well, I don't need to paint pictures, everybody knows. And that is the road that's laid out for you by the midwelt, by the collective, by the superego, by the left brain. And so it's quite a journey to be able to step out of that. Most people will not. We already know that. They'll just wait, pause, hold their breath, and wait for everything to come back to normal again, and then just go back to sleep. But there's a few people who will, not do that and will observe this time and take it to heart and say, my God, I'll let the world intrude. I never knew the luxury of giving myself that rest, giving myself that space, giving myself that time. So it would take podcast after podcast to extrapolate on how you work with time, but I'm just introducing the fact that there's a phenomenon called time, and most people know nothing about it because the daily schedule has usurped it or impersonated it. And then all of the different successes and triumphs that you think you've attained in that field of time will never be there on your deathbed. It will not matter because you haven't owned temporality in the existentially authentic way. And so that's a key thing that I did leave out in other comments, but now I'm wonderful that you brought me on, because we definitely need to mention that. So that's another piece in the toolkit for people to work with time, to embrace time, to apologize to time.
Wow.
And to enter into a completely new comportment with it.
Yeah, what I'm hearing you talk about is actually having an earnest, authentic relationship with the phenomena of time, as if it's a sentient being itself. And that right there, I mean, I have never even said that or even thought that thought. And that right there, I can see how wide and how deep dug that idea right there is. So maybe we'll just kind of put that out there into the field and let people kind of chew on that idea that maybe we need to develop. Maybe this is the opportunity of a lifetime that we've all been given to actually reestablish a healthy, authentic relationship with time. It's just like any other relationship. If you're in a partnership with another human being and you don't make that a priority and you don't take time, and I have challenges with this, and I noticed okay, this is spirituality. Like being in a relationship in of itself is like, you want to talk about spirituality, you can you can be the monk on the mountaintop all you want, but really you want to see where the self-organizing complex system of life is, add another person to it, right? And then get into that and see where your rough edges and your triggers and your insecurities really are if you really want growth. Well, I notice same thing with time, this whole idea of time. And again, like, we probably don't have the time, quote unquote, to even do that justice, but just to make that point, because what you just brought up is really, I think it's the point. If there was one thing to really lay down solid in this conversation, I think that, and I want to get into some other things, but I think that right there is the thing.
If we gave 1/5 of the time we give to other people and the care, I'll just use that word, to time, we're not even asking for a whole dollop. Oh my God, how your life would change. And the meditation is really to think of the passing of the seasons. Your meditation to hang your hat on with this when it slips away is to stay focused on how the seasons pass into each other, how nature's own time. This is not something you can learn from men. As I told you, that's where the problem arose. It's from the collective that the problem, why we have committed the crime against time that we have. And there's a whole apology to time, right? That needs to be undergone.
There's like a reconciliation.
Yes.
Right. So if you
Beautiful
were to
word.
almost like anthropomorphize time, just for the given example, if you were in a relationship and you broke that trust somehow, you can't just it's just going to go back to normal. It's like, no, first of all, once you've broken trust, whatever that means, it's never going to go back to the way it was. If it continues together, it's going to be fundamentally different. And there has to be a reconciliation. There has to be an apology. There has to be some kind of honoring of what had just occurred, whatever that break in trust was. Let's just use that example. We can all understand that, right? Or the indifference, maybe, not giving it attention, not giving it the care that you mentioned, right? There is a reestablishing of a relationship that has to happen. And the point I think I'm driving at too is that within the time that we're in, this moment of time, nothing's going to be the same. And I think that is something I just want to get across to people and also get your take on as we're talking about this. We're going through some kind of moment in time where automatically nothing's going to be the same as it was before this proposed pandemic that we're in. We're experiencing something that's never ever happened before, and we're going through some kind of tunnel or transition that you can give us a lot more cosmological perspective on, and just social perspective on. And I don't know what's on the other end of it. I have some ideas, but ultimately what I feel like I know is that nothing's going to be the way it was before. So perhaps this is the opportunity, if there ever was an opportunity, to reestablish our relationship with the present moment, because that's going to inform where we go from here.
Yeah, if you are too focused on the horizon, you lose sight of the steps you're taking at this given time. And by the way, the top existential philosophers who have extrapolated these things on time, the word that they use is reconciliation. So you're bang on. In German, the word for reconciliation is exactly the word that they use, right? Amongst others. So you're bang on there, Ronnie. But quite, and remember, here's the weird thing about it, that those acts toward time are occurring at any time. See, so it's like a weird paradox. There's no time set aside. Time allows you to come in at any time. The door's always open. Hey, you can't, you're just like, oh, you come to church only on the Saturday to light the candle. The other guy comes every day. Look, as long as the candle is lit, it don't really fucking matter, right? Because the man who only comes for 1 hour could be spiritually far more intense with what he's doing than the guy who's coming, okay, here we go. And not focused on it. This is entirely qualitative.
Not going through the motions, right? Like actually, like in terms of like if somebody has a prayer, it's different than we can easily just go through the motions. But that's the whole thing in of itself. But I don't want to derail this, but like I think right now a lot of people are just going through the motions, and then that's also where that resistance that we talked about before, that rub up against transitioning into more of an authentic, present, fully engaged version of us, which is the version of us that actually does what we want to do. but we hold ourselves back from doing what we want to do because we have these programs. And yeah, again, I didn't want to throw you off. You just get me going so much that I can't help it.
Well, again, a key point is that you see, this is not some ideology that needs to be imposed by somebody else. You know, the essence of the prayer to time. All you need to do is the personal introspection to see how you yourself have abused time, because it's in our own lives. That's why it's called existential. You need just to look back, and every human being listening to us right now will find moments of their life where they definitely abuse time. I'll say no more about it, but you have to look inside. And when you see that, when that becomes a reality, then the statements of others are just signposts, because now you caught it and you won't do it again. You know, those are moments where something slipped by in your life, right? A statement wasn't made, a timeout wasn't taken. You see, there's umpteen violations that we've made on an existential level. And you see, there's existential shame. You know, we don't want to get into the whole 9 yards of it, but this produces what is known as existential shame, which is very different than guilt. Guilt is towards infractions towards other people. You can go and get the forgiveness or not. Shame is violations against the self, which is a totally different dynamic and which causes a different kind of pathology, which psychologists today couldn't, actually, they've probably never been really interested, except for a very small window of time just after Freud. Basically, it fell. And the champions in America who tried to champion it, they weren't heard. So we're into guilt, and we're into fixes in pharmacology, you know, and it hurts, doc, quickly, you know, fix it. The whole real psychoanalysis and psychology, which deals with this existential shame of the crimes we've committed to ourselves, right? That is null and void today. And I try to make it a key part of what I'm, you know, into. But one of these that stands out is our whole, what's called temporality, our relationship with the time, how we've objectified it, how do we pushed it away, how we violated it constantly, and how we do have a quotient of shame, actually. You know, a very new concept of people who are totally unfamiliar with this, but nevertheless, there's a shame there that at some point has to be negotiated. It's part of what's known as the underworld journey, right? The underworld journey, if you track it in the tarot or in astrology or in any other tradition, a Jungian one, a Campbellian one, you know, any tradition that you look at, the neophyte in his journey of the underworld will be suspended, you know, like the hangman. That's number 12. Well, how many digits are on the clock, right, etc. So the hangman, number 12, is the neophyte. He's the initiate, whether that's in Celtic Ireland or the deepest, darkest Africa, it wouldn't matter. He's going to be in a moment where time is suspended. You know, sometimes they even physically put you out in the middle of the desert. You don't know where the hell you are in the middle of the night. And you don't know what you're going to run into. You're going to be eaten, or you're going to get stung by a cactus. You know, you just don't know. So you have to find from within you the orientation. So this crisis point right here can be extrapolated, and it's far more interesting for me to do that, to be extrapolated along these archetypal existential lines, not losing sight, right? 10, 20% of what somebody else saying, what is going on, but never to lose sight of that, as you said, that grounding, that self-reference. And people don't have self-reference. They've got world reference. They've got persona reference. How's my mask doing? How am I looking now? Am I getting those successes? Keep polishing that badge, right? No. These are things that are going to throw you off kilter, and they're part then indelibly of that underworld experience. They're part of the fool's journey, right? Or the as Joseph Campbell called it, the hero with 1,000 faces, right? But it's the fool's journey, and now we're all on it. But it's only at times like this that the masses get to realize, I'm on the fool's journey. Go figure.
That's really interesting. I was just, as you were talking, I just had this thought that if we are still heavily invested in the world that was before this, we are preparing for a world that won't quite exist. In other words, we won't be prepared for the world that's coming. And I don't know what the world that's coming. I have ideas. I'm sure you have your own ideas too. But like I mentioned before, I don't think it's going to be based on the same parameters and skill sets of our social world. I think there's a complete restructuring going on. I think there's a lot of things going on behind the scenes, and there's a lot of ideas being, and I kind of want to transition because I think you're uniquely qualified and probably have some perspectives that I haven't heard yet in terms of some of the things that are getting brought up to the surface through shaking up the fish tank. And I use this analogy a lot, whether it's physical detoxification, cleansing the body. A lot of times when someone has a parasite infection, for example, they do all the parasite elimination herbs or whatever the things are. This can happen with antibiotics, and things get worse before they get better. And people are like, oh no, that means something's wrong. It's like, no, that's actually a good sign, because that's when the parasite is on its last ditch effort. It's secreting all these chemicals. It's trying to misdirect the immune system because it knows it's about to go. And that's its last survival instinct. So your system is going, you have all these immune things happening. You got to wait it out. You got to just pace it out, because this is, where you're going to get clear. My point is, when you shake up the fish tank, before the fish tank gets cleaned out and it looks pristine and clear, there's all that muck that comes up. Well, one of the interesting things that I've seen through this whole phenomena that we're experiencing, well, the first thing is that I'm surprised that everybody still thinks this is about a virus. I mean, maybe I'm just way ahead of the curve. Maybe I'd never even thought that to begin with. But so much else has come up to the surface that's actually come into the mass collective awareness. Secret societies, satanic pedophile perpetrators like that. This is actually like things that you've known for a while and I've become more aware of over the years. Deception, lies, deceit in our political institutions, the loony left, as they're calling it. I didn't even know that was an actual term, but it looks like Fox News actually has coined the loony left. And I started watching, I'm like, these people are absolutely Looney Tunes. I had no idea. So even I'm starting to see things differently. Donald Trump, like, whoa, wait a minute. Is there something behind the scenes? Was he possibly recruited? I'm learning all this new information and insights that I'm seeing all over the internet that either I didn't see or wasn't there before this whole thing happened. So what I'm getting at is that somehow this thing catalyzed an entire how do I want to say it? Like the way that I see it, and I want to get your take on this. I'm feeling like everything that has been laid under the surface, all the way from JFK and the assassination, all the way to the Titanic, I've taken all the way back to how the Federal Reserve got started and that whole thing. And I've seen a piecing back together of our forbidden American history and world history and all the conspiratorial things that have happened that have been pushed underneath the rug. All of a sudden, I'm seeing it coming up to the mass surface, and there's something interesting happening there. And I just want to get your take on. And I know I'm throwing a lot out there, but I know you can put that together in some kind of way that makes sense for people. Ultimately, what I'm getting at is this is triggering some kind of shaking up of the fish tank that is way beyond some kind of virus.
Yeah, there's viruses, from a medical point of view, there's viruses less destructive, more destructive. There's those two cases. As I have no problem accepting that there is even, a biological threat right now, because it's all, Africa's had it dozens of times, and there's a lot of logic to it as well. But then on the other hand, I ask myself, why is it that Japan, I think until today, is still not in lockdown? Why are they able to handle it? And they're closest to China. They never experienced lockdown. I always trust Japan to be telling us what the slime in China is doing. And they've been telling us. But the West then went into a different mode, completely in contradistinction. Videos that were the fastest removed by Google were the ones that talked about it being fake. Any connection there? It's like they don't realize that the censorship leads us right to the truth. If there was nothing to fear from those few videos, they wouldn't have been bloody removed as fast, would they? Big sign, Google. Take another couple of things down. We'll know now that that was where the truth lay. So, even the person who wants to buy into the mainstream, hey, buddy, you better think like we're thinking here. Don't just buy the narrative, right? And when you make a black op, it's really, really good. When you put those three-headed monsters at the gate, they're experts at doing it. They know how to do it. They'll even kill people to make it look real. The government does this kind of thing because they don't care about you, right? And they have lots of collateral, things that they do. And so we must stay even as an exercise. Imagine you were, working with a bow and arrow, right? Or a weapon. You have to practice every day. Well, this is war. And this means practice every day with the tools of discernment, with high skepticism, and with a very flexible mind, you see, to be able to turn a thing around and look at it from different perspectives. You've got to convince yourself that, yes, this is an absolute biological threat. Right, now, how do I see the picture? Then you got to be able to set that aside and go, no, it is not a biological threat. It is bogus. How do I see things from that? You've got to be able to do that. Otherwise, sign off and go back. Get out of it. Get the fuck out of this movement. If you can't do that, right? Sorry to be a boot camp, sergeant major about this, but you're not qualified. I don't know what you think you are, but you're not capable. This subject is holy work, and it demands, right, a kind of intelligence that's absolutely unique, right? And that is why our schools don't want you to be rational. They don't want you to be highly critical. They don't want you to be judgmental. The New Age movement, religion, just faith, believe it. Big Brother tells you. The All-Father's enlightened. He tells you not to trust your mind, except in one place. When you have to accept him as being the totemic father, then you can use your mind. And people don't catch on. Right? You're surrounded in an illusion, right? You're surrounded in it. What was that book by Lloyd Pye? Everything you know is wrong, right? And I want to see people in this movement always coming from this position that everything I know could be wrong. Still looking at things, with tremendous passion, but always having that edict of stoicism, detachment, and malleability to say, hey, this is Aikido. I am fighting something that is so unbelievably informed about my mind. And I know nothing about my mind. And I am including here body. People know nothing about it. That's why I love your work. So it is such a tremendous study, right? It's like the great master can be 200 pounds and he can walk on rice paper. Yeah, well, how the hell do you think that's done? Because they're in harmony, man. Their bodies, it's not about being under control. This is the whole thing that the West has got it wrong. It's about the flow. It's about the Tao, right? And it's about the sort of flexibility of the Tao. And also to realize that in any type of, sorry to come back to existentialism again, but in any encounter, in any experience, a selfie is actually involved. You are implicitly there, but you're invisible by proximity. So my work, the work of existential psychology, is to emboss the idea of the self so that when you're in this and that experience or going through this and that mood, right, or engagement, you're very, very aware. I am there. Like you get behind yourself, right? And I don't subscribe to techniques because I want you to find the technique yourself. Mm-hmm. I want you to be able to always be grounded and aware. Here I am in this, situation. And when you teach that kind of disciplines, these are the real meditations, then it doesn't matter to you what kind of, creepy crawlies and monsters are, you can co-opt it. You can actually make it an assault course, because people are too flabby, as you well know, Ronnie, people are too preoccupied with the stimuli of the world. Mm-hmm. They've had umpteen movies. They've had umpteen songs, beautiful stuff. How could you miss it? From the 60s and 70s and 80s, there's people of the highest poetic level, of the greatest filmmaking capacity, masters of imagery, who've laid it on the line. It's there in the world's favorite music and the world's favorite songs and the greatest films that have ever been produced. How to Live. So if you are existentially deranged and you are a criminal to your own self, because despite all of that, you just carry on with inauthenticity, expect the whirlwind. Might be my only comment. Expect total meltdown. That all these, all of these support mechanisms that you think are so damn wonderful, they just melt. They turn to jello in your hands. Told you so. But you didn't want to listen. Yeah. Well, then perish.
Yeah, and it kind of like, I don't know if this is a roundabout thought, but I just thought about this idea that, you don't get the leaders that you want, you get the leader that you deserve. And so I want to take this to Donald Trump for a moment, not to get into anything specific, but just to bring this up, because it's been utterly fascinating to me, because I thought politics forever was like completely irrelevant to anything real. It never had any bearing on my reality. I thought it was some kind of like props and stages, smoke and mirror. And I imagine that was mostly accurate. But all of a sudden I find myself curiously watching just bits and pieces here. And obviously I'm looking beyond the surface and with this whole QAnon phenomenon and just looking at all this alternative information. I'm curious your thoughts on all of this and these things around mass arrests and this idea that just the simple idea that nothing is as it seems, right? So from the perspective of what appears to be happening in our world and what appears to be happening to us, some people are on it's basically like this. We either have to pick a lane, right? I'm going to go doom or gloom. So it's all leading to like martial law and forced vaccination and 5G and all this like total control, like militaristic control, as if like, everybody's out to get us, basically. It's that train of thought. And there's the ultimate conclusion of that. Or maybe, just maybe, there's the appearance of what was the control system plan, which is all the things that I just mentioned, right? That's all, we've all kind of known that. That's not really hard to figure out. But maybe that's not actually the ultimate conclusion of where this is going. Maybe there are people and there are things going on behind the scenes that we don't understand, that our limbic system can't quite capitulate and put together. And maybe this is actually going towards our sovereignty and freedom. And I'm curious what you think about that. And I'm also curious, just any ideas that you have around even Donald Trump. I'd love to know what your perspectives are, just out of curiosity. As I'm sure you've been paying attention to things and you have a certain perspective that might be enlightening.
Well, if you go back to the statements he made throughout his whole life, he's still consistent with many of those, and that's a good sign.
Yeah.
Right. He's also heading in directions I support, except that I would hurry him up because he hasn't accomplished. He hasn't accomplished, a great deal. Probably one of the most important things that I would feel he should have moved on almost immediately. And even though there is a delay, he may still move on it, is things like, the Freedom Amendment 1, the freedom to speak what you want. And he should be knocking Google out. He should just be he should be giving the ordinary person in the streets so much legal power. Now, a couple of months ago, he did actually start on that journey. So as I say, I'm still observing.
Yeah.
But where my focus is, what I do is I think of a man who is really basically a paleo-conservative, or even if he wasn't originally, he started to align himself with this, the conservative movement behind the scenes. In other words, they chose him. They said, you're the boy we want.
That's what, yeah, exactly.
You know what I mean?
Right.
And of course, you see, to the vast majority of liberal Americans, and they're not liberal, they're communists. Let's just get that straight so we can move on. What is a liberal in America is by and large an absolute socialist communist.
Yep.
They hate the conservatives of any description, and most of those people are white, male, wealthy people. That's enough to have them being hated by the vast majority of the flunkies in America. So I don't listen to any of those people. Donald Trump looks just fine to me. I'm a Belfast raised lad. There's nothing about Donald Trump that worries me. Mm-hmm. He's not even. And I'd be even worse if I was his, attaché. If I was somebody attached to him and advising. I go, you just go for it, mate. Keep doing. That's what got you elected in the first place. So, mm-hmm. Okay, America? Right, yeah. Mm-hmm. But more factually, I look back to the disaster and the damage done by his predecessors going all the way back to Woodrow Wilson.
Wow.
When you see the absolute flagrant damage that nobody on earth could ever put Humpty Dumpty back together again, I'm not even asking for that, because the CFR and the Round Table, and they've hired every president since Roosevelt, and Woodrow Wilson was your first one. And I don't think even later presidents did half the damage even that one president did, right, with his cohort from the British Round Table groups, Colonel Mandel House. But of course, it just spiraled out of control there. And anybody who tried to come in, from the side, like Barry Goldwater, who's like the kind of President Trump before the President Trump, only somewhat more sophisticated, so to speak. But anybody like that who's tried to come in was unable to come in. They assassinated them. They took them out in one way or another. And I don't mean Kennedy here. He was one of the establishment. He got taken out for other reasons. He was perfectly an establishment goon. So was Reagan, so was Bush, so was Obama, all of them. There's no, see, after this period that I'm talking about, after Wilson, there is no genuine conservative movement in America, that has any political power. It still has wealth, and it still has money, and it still has elite control over what it has control over, but it ceased to have political power from this time of Wilson, because what was happening at the time of Wilson made sure they couldn't really exercise power, and that the only people in government who would be wealthy were wealthy corporate communists. Not, as people have been deluded in this country to think, capitalists. They got rid of all of the conservative media hosts, like Morton Downey and others I could mention. They get rid of them, systematically knocked them out, right? And they get rid of any presidential candidate. And so since Reagan and before, since Nixon, all the way back, it's just one big CFR fest, right? Now, they do move the goalposts a little bit, and bend the lighting. So a little bit conservative over here. No, they need a little bit of liberalism here. But take that away now. They play that game, as everybody by now should know. That's just a shadow play. But it's basically, everything's moved so far left that to call Donald Trump a conservative is already a misnomer, because his kind of conservatism is still not the real thing any more than anything over, anything over in Britain. You see, it's all moved so far left that you can actually construe Tony Blair as a hawk and a possible neocon and all the rubbish they talked about. Yeah, because since the time of Thatcher, the whole thing has moved so drastically towards the left that you can even think of Margaret Thatcher as a capitalist and a conservative, when she was anything but. She was just a crypto capitalist. She sold England out to the Swiss banks and to Europe, while pretending, I said, the shadow play, making it look like she was, completely the opposite. But any fool could see that her actual behavior, and if you know where to go to find out these things, I post this on my blog all the time, these historical anecdotes, so that you can substantiate the things I'm talking about. So first of all, Donald Trump is not a conservative, so be very careful there, right? He's only conservative in the shadow sense, where it's a stage setup, right? But even with that new window dressing, it doesn't mean that the man can't at least, undo some of the catastrophic things that happened, from the time of Woodrow Wilson. And that's how I check anybody that comes in. Well, Obama was a complete failure. Clinton's a complete failure. None of it's restored. It's just more of the same old. Backing the Europe, backing the League of Nations, United Nations, and every other GATT, my God, NAFTA, right? All of those things, all of the things that, we've had 2 world wars. Remember those, right? So in between Woodrow Wilson's tenure, which is the early, early 1900s, you've had nothing but catastrophe. That's got us to where we are now. So when you factor in that background, who's actually, sort of now being put into the made for TV limelight, made so that you'll throw darts at him or you'll put laurel leaves around, is really so insignificant. You just simply look at the fruit, but the tree by its fruit. Hey, I like some of the stuff he's doing. I want him to keep heading in that direction. You keep looking at it, and you keep pulling back from the canvas as well. So you read what you basically, in practical terms, I suggest people read the book lists that I'm constantly putting up. That are both from the extreme left and this, the right and the middle, and really educate yourself, and also maybe put yourself into the position of somebody like that who is a representative of that old money. Those paleo conservatives who really don't have a lot of power, politically. Now, their detractors always try to make it look like they do, but I'm telling you, they do not. Right? The people who have the power and the money are the George Soros types. He's just one of millions of them who have a very, very, very leftist ideology. We know this because books were written in the 1960s by people like Alan Bloom and others explaining this. So this is not my theory. This is backed up. And then there's reiterations from people like Douglas Murray and so many other great, great writers. And then there's even another generation now, like Dinesh D'Souza and, Stein and who else, the Tucker Carlson sort of group, young men who have desperately trying to go back to some sort of tradition, try to find what was authentic in original American culture and look at some of the negs as well. What's his name? Glenn Beck. And that kind of person, and they speak to me. They really do. I'll not be coy about that, because that's the kind of American I expected to find when I came over to America. Because I say I'm a Belfast lad, right? I grew up. You're talking about the shaking up and the constant, stirring the waters. How can anything happen in the world, when somebody has 24 years of nonstop violence, on all levels of their life, out to the bigger political question. There's nonstop high intensity terrorism or violence. Well, forgive me if I'm wrong. I'm sleeping on my hammock when all of this is happening. It's not the biggest deal to somebody who's been deeply, affected by that. So what that does is it makes your perspective a little calmer. Remember in Jaws, right? They go to get the old bugger, the old Irish bugger in the boat. Yeah, I'll take it on, no problem. Just give me some, a couple of hooks.
Yeah.
You give me the money, I'll go get your shark. That's basically my attitude. It'll take a lot more of that to scare somebody from Northern Ireland who went through a lot of stuff and saw a lot of stuff. And that's not some heroic statement. That's just, it was the milieu. Somebody could say it about growing up in Israel, right? It is the milieu that you're born in attacks your system. And therefore you end up either crumbling and fizzling away like a little, beta, and you're just scared of the world, or it fortifies you where I'll take you on. I don't care how many heads you've got. Right, it's David and Goliath, right? And that's my kind of mentality.
Yeah,
you fortify yourself, and so that leads us to another question about: is one of the biggest attacks on the world right now the demasculinization, either through subliminal seduction, through a liberal message, right? So you can come at this even from that point of view. That one of the reasons we're in the shit we're in now is we've got no Robert Shaws, right, going out with a penknife to kill Jaws. Where are you people? Hello, is anybody out there? Right. So, because this is nothing, man. This is nothing.
Yeah.
Right. Really, if you contextualize it, learn about Passchendaele and what blood lies in the soil there, my friend, and at the Marne.
One thing you just brought up something which I think is an interesting point. I think from my perspective, and a lot of people might have problem with this, but I'm going to say it. My perspective on all this is that we're dealing with more of a perceived crisis than we are with an actual crisis. If you look at all the data, this has been done to death on social media. If you look at all the data around the coronavirus, the COVID-19 virus, and the statistics, and everything else that we've ever gone through, any other kind of flu or viral infection or anything that was a legitimate pandemic, the statistics that have been recorded are minuscule. Now, if you actually, there's so much stuff coming out where the media is actually fabricating hospital scenes, literally copying and pasting hospital photos from Italy and saying this is what's going on in New York. And then there's other people that are like, wait, that looks like the same thing. Then they map it together, and now they're like, hey, they said this is New York, but this is a scene in Italy, and it's the exact same thing. This is going on. Then there's also a lot of records of doctors and nurses and other researchers coming out saying that the statistics are skewed. The testing is completely inaccurate. It's basically as good as flipping a coin. It's 50-50, and it's based on maybe opinion or just like whatever. It's not an actual legitimate test. And if somebody in the hospital dies of, say, pneumonia, or let's say a heart attack, there's instances where people are just on the death certificate saying it was corona, or it's being changed to corona. There's doctors and nurses that have come out on record saying, hey, this person had a heart attack or heart disease, and then they came back and the death certificate said they died of coronavirus. It's
some of the people who administrate hospitals are members of very powerful secret societies, like the Shriners, Scottish Rite, and so on. I don't trust one thing these people say. The nurse may be okay, and she may be saying this has happened, just like a newspaper has an editor who'll rewrite what you just gave him.
But she's a pawn on the chessboard too.
Yes, they're pawns. But just like in a newspaper where the editor sets to work to rewrite your piece so that even you can't recognize it, right? And then that's your job over. Your job is very clearly just, demarcated, and then you have no say, zero say over what happens with your data when it gets up into the hands of these administrators. And then they are controlled by big pharma, who are controlled by the secret government. And so what the secret government want, they get. These institutions are by no means independent. They even think that they are. They're part of the whole corporate structure. And so when the script comes down, this is what you're going to do. Even presidents have to somewhat, negotiate that and acknowledge that. And what we have learned to do, hopefully, is always turn to the alternative. That's what the alternative movement is about. right? It's about people who second guess that. And there, as we said in the very beginning of the show, there are people that are trustworthy there, to that degree, and you can work it out. And I think you're right as well. I think that they're doctoring the hell out of it, and it's very easy to do because, as you quite said, all you're doing at the base level is asking a person what their symptoms are. Now that document can be manipulated in you can turn it like a Rubik's Cube to get out what you want at the end of it. Yeah, that person had coronavirus, knock it up another one. I wouldn't trust that.
There's so much hysteria and mayhem going on. Who's doing the record keeping? Who's keeping track of people? Who's putting
They are.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
So that's why, go ahead.
Well, videos were taken down super fast of the contradictory line. Yeah, Google, thanks for pointing it out to us, because now we know where to look for the truth, you freaking idiots. Mm-hmm. You go after videos and leave thousands of others on there that all seem to have the same narrative, but the ones that dissent, they're gone mysteriously. Now, let me think what that might mean. You don't have to be Columbo.
Right. Well, and of course, it's because it's all in the guise of giving you the right information and protecting you from disinformation or misinformation. That's it's just a really fascinating thing. So that's why I just take it back to this whole thing of perception of crisis versus the actuality of a real crisis. I'm not saying people aren't affected. I'm not saying this is even a hoax, because there's people out there on the internet saying that the virus isn't real.
No, it's real.
It's definitely real. There is a virus, right? But there's also a lot of other things going on. What is it, geo-warfare or bio-warfare? I mean, was it man-made? Well, I'll tell you this, it has a patent on it. So does Ebola, so does Zika, so does AIDS. Those all have patents on it, right? That's interesting. Well, that means that it was man-made. You can't put a patent on something that's organic in nature. Right. That's why you have a pharmaceutical companies that synthesize compounds in nature, in plants particularly, so they can put a patent on it and they can monopolize it, right? Well, hold on now. That's interesting. So I think that becomes part of the inquiry that's going on now, and part of the deception of the veils that are just so thin. They're so damn thin now that it's unavoidable to see that, hey, something's not right here. There are people at effect. We are all at effect in some way. We're having a shared experience for the first time ever as a global society. We're all having a shared experience of being put in our home, and we're all kind of on the same topic, which is a really interesting phenomenon. So we're all kind of on the same page in that sense. And but there, I'm gonna transition here, but the idea is that we're being forced to see through the paper thin veil that's been there all along, and somehow there's a catalytic effect that this is having. My thing isn't to go push the button to death on the virus or all these different ideas. It's just to push the button on the fact that this is a catalyst. This is a catalytic moment, if there ever was one, for that veil to fall apart and us to finally get on board with what the truth is.
That's right. And I agree with that 100%, because it's also backed up with astrologically what's taking place. Maybe we can touch briefly on that in a minute, but the catalyst is that sometimes when you do shake up things, people waken up, which you did not expect to happen. You've done it for your own reasons, but sometimes it's just the right place and the right time. That bump, I described it as, one of those Indian buses, careering around, a mountain path, and suddenly everybody gets this huge precipice. That'll wake you up. That'll give you some vertigo, and by God, it's needed, So it wouldn't be the first time that these scares have been used. It wouldn't be the first time that they've attracted attention to the underlying mechanics that the other school says, you fools, we're getting the way we want by not attracting attention to us. And now look what you have done. Right? Didn't you know there's got an internet? Don't you know that there's different kind of thinking amongst the people today? What were you thinking? You see, so they do go wrong. I did a thing called the Dying Conspiracy, where we try to harp on that. And this could indeed be, as you're saying, another, sign that they blew it. The criminal blew up, he used too much dynamite to blow up the safe, and the whole damn district heard it, and all the alarms have gone off. And you know something? I'm happy for that too, right? I go, what? I'm not worrying, because people like me, do you realize the lampooning that I've had to endure for decades? being told that even when obvious, half the stuff we've talked about was totally rejected by people, close and far. Hey, I'm going to love it when the world goes, okay, we're post proving the conspiracy.
And
we are?
All
thank you.
All of a sudden, all those things that you've been harping on all those years, all of a sudden, everybody's an expert online about those exact same things out of nowhere.
Shut up already, they're saying to me. I'm going, thank you. Now, can we move on then? Can we get into the other material that I've also got mustered? Because apparently you've all been convinced all of a sudden. Now there can't be any argument against, well, you guys are just crazy. Oh, we are we? You see? So in many ways, do you see the benefit of this? It happened at an astrological time, by the way, which is indicative of that. Even the very period where it really ramped up is a time exactly known by astrologers to do this kind of thing where we old crimes are dug up, let's say, old conversations are had, and truth that was truth, wins the day. It's brought back to the table and it wins the day. So that was already, kind of a help to me because it's happening at a time where it was quite predictable, but there are counter aspects as well in which, the phenomena of progress, right, is exactly where the planet Saturn is right now. It's in the house of progress, which is Aquarius. And that can mean bad and good things. It can mean chaos and scatteredness and wacko jacko stuff. But in general, it means healthy mental, development, technological development in all the positive ways. Saturn, the planet, just within the last week or so has come in there. And that is like your caveman with his club coming in like a Luddite to smash up a great deal of, what constitutes extremely good progress. So what that will mean is a recidivist, fundamentalistic, crude, right, anti-progressive method, mentality comes to bear. And it'll manifest in different grades. But it's not good on the whole because, where successes have been made, sometimes this is going to be arrested now. And see, when you have a panic like this, the trouble is that also can force people back into a limbic sort of realm, a limbic mode of consciousness, right? The only positive that comes out of it that I can see is that Saturn will put a crimp on we use the word again this time, but capital P, progressive in the political way. It makes people more conservative, and it says, let's go back to some old traditions. I don't even see what was wrong with them anymore. It's like waking up from a trance where, this hurtling forth in areas that are not productive and are deeply, deeply destructive. Saturn could indeed finally be, the putty and the cement that sort of blocks that hole. And so we'll have to notice whether the liberal movement, the super socialists and all, if people are starting to slap them down, that'll be an indication of the Saturn in Aquarius, right? So there's both positive and negative things there. The negative being the true.
Can I ask you about that real quick? You just brought something up. I want to just ask you about that because I've been noticing when I've been going on YouTube and looking at all these news broadcasts, like everything except for Fox News is completely anti-Trump. It's like 100% focusing on impeachment. We got to, that didn't work. Let's do it again. Let's just it's absurd. It's literally like absurdity, right? And all this is going on. And anyone that's paid attention to this and who's in that world can see what's happening. Fox News, and I don't know what's going on behind the scenes, if they've been going through some kind of restructuring, they're talking about deep state, shadow government. They're actually talking about facts, and they're actually backing up the president, and they're actually going against the Democrats, if you will. Not to good or bad. It just is what it is. That's what we're talking about. That entire side, if you will, the left, is just completely like they have their own agenda. That's just what it is. They have their own weird agenda, and they don't seem to care about people. They don't seem to care about the citizens. That has nothing to do with their agenda, apparently. And Fox News is calling them out in a way I've never. Let me just say this quote, and this is my question based on what you just said. I'm trying to get some understanding on this. I heard one of the people on Fox News, they were having this like interaction. He said, the media being worried about misinformation is like the mafia being worried about murder. And I damn near fell out of the back of my seat. I was like, what did I just hear? And it's been going on like this. So I'm curious if that plays into exactly what you're talking about with the astrology.
Yeah, the left is a deeply, see, we have enemies, right? So every time you think of a Trump or a Western leader, you know, you have to factor into that background we talked about. And one of the factors of the background is, guess what? The West has enemies. And that's not ever brought up part of the narrative. Sweet old China, good old China, help China. Putin, Mr. Wonderful. He loves puppies. Islam. You know, look, for goodness sake, know at least who your enemies are, right? And those enemies have systematically, since the time of Woodrow Wilson, implanted their own agents within the heart of American culture. And America has done next to nothing outside a few conspiracy people I could mention. In the mainstream, they've done nothing to remedy the fact, even though you've had some of the most finest Americans, people I bow to, like Stanton Evans and others, who lived their whole lives trying to expose it, right? Okay, so you say, here's a network who is doing wonderful work. We had Glenn Beck on there, right? I mean, that's almost enough in itself. Now you got Tucker Carlson and some other really great people. Okay, why? Go back to my work of 2005, 6, and 7, and even before that. And I went blue in the face predicting that the mainstream media would at some point troll all the works of your G. Edward Griffins, you know, and the Eustace Mullins, and the whole of our movement is slowly being trolled. And it will finally pop up. I don't know where and I don't know when, but I guaranteed my audience that it will. And that was because they had gone bankrupt a long time ago. And they were playing, you know, they were driving on gas through most of the 90s. And therefore, slowly, imperceptibly, they start trawling and plagiarizing and cannibalizing the work of the underground, of which I was a part from very early on. Do you realize my videos were on Google Vid? The very first time you could upload a video. And I remember, you know, having difficulty doing it because they didn't even have the bandwidth, right? And all the rest of it, right? So this movement of which I was a part, and I was very sensitive. I knew, I'd done my homework and I knew, what does Bo Greit stand for? You see, what is, you know, Ralph Epperson, all of these different names. Some of them are still going, right? And many have departed, Sherman Skolnick and all these people, right? So knowing thoroughly what everyone was doing, I could then immediately take a reading when I said, wait a minute, whoa, what's that, right? Shit, a little bit of astrotheology there, whoa. In a mainstream show? Nah. So I've been tracking it, Ronnie, from the mid-90s onwards, and it's just ramped up and ramped up and ramped up. So now when we get now to 2019, and Fox News is indeed practically, you know, calling the shots, it's only because the rule had already been set. They weren't doing, see, they responded to what already the underground was doing. They did not do it because they wanted to. They did it because to stay alive. In the 1980s, they were even taking readings, let alone in the 90s, that people's viewing of mainstream news shows had dropped to almost 40 to 50%. And it's continued. People's reading of the rags that they're putting out was falling off to the point where these companies were bankrupt. They've even 60 Minutes and others have even made programs about it. What's happening to mainstream news? Right. So I tracked that and knew they were getting bankrupt with the tawdry garbage, right? Where you had to find, if you could find in years of programming, one little anecdote, one little Morton Downey or one little thing, you know, and you'd have to be glad for it. So they responded by saying, we've got to do an overhaul. Let's stop treating these you know, conspiracy people and hinterlanding them. Some of them are generals, for fuck's sake. Smedley Butler. Some of them are colonels. Some of them are, you know, this is, what have we been thinking? So they simply inject, you know, put their straws in and sucked out. And you have to be glad for it, because people like us who are in the background, you're glad for any little bit of exposure. A movie by this guy, you know, a movie by that guy, a little bit come out, you know, Brotherhood of the Bell, or, you know, and something for, you know, you're glad for it in many ways, because as imperfect as it is, but now it's exploded. Now they've all agreed to say, hey, we're going for broke. Troll that movement. What's that Alex Jones guy? What's his name? Right? Just we're already getting audiences without any advertising. We're already having thousands of people in the Patriot movement, right? And people who have a spirit of true Americanism are listening to these people. Then came 9/11, right? And you had a slew of great work from the underworld, right? That came out. I can't remember the names right now, but there was a lot of people, you know, I knew personally who'd made these excellent DVDs exposing that, right? I even made one. So there's all sorts of, and there's brilliant stuff out there. Excuse me, you know, because I can't remember the names right now, but there was some really, really fine scholars did this. Barry Zwicker would be one, right? So out of that movement comes even more, right? So suddenly the mainstream media is not dumb, they have their sensors out. They don't just keep the focus on where they are. They're watching what's happening in the undercurrents, in the underground, it doesn't have the budget of itself. It will never reach mainstream, but they're observing how it just sort of nearly does. And then, like a chameleon with a long tongue, wasn't there a fly there a minute ago? Right? And so they just simply sampled a vast, vast amount. And I've been watching it day after day, week after week. And now you got History Channel doing Atlantis and bug-eyed aliens. Do you think for 1 minute that 25 years ago, even if the demand of the public was there, these companies just said no? You had your odd William Shatner thing, and you had your odd little, narrated by, say, Leonard Nimoy. There were a few, Arthur C. Clarke and all that. But it was far and few between. And it was mostly people just watched it tongue in cheek. Eric von Däniken was crucified, right? And in very recent history. So what I see, what you're talking about, is because of the internet, is because of the incredible hard work, of the dwarves in the dark places of the world, laying down these foundations, establishing the credibility, men that people don't even know, that I tried desperately to bring up in my work. James Perloff, John Stormer, and hundreds of other names that, I can rattle off, because I've seen this process. And so now finally it breaks through and Fox News gets all the credit. That's the way that's one of the great, actually, paradoxes of the world. It's one of the great, it is really one of the ironies that we forget the men who labored in the engine rooms. And I will never forget their names, because they enlightened me. And they allowed me then to step out into the world, to transmit their knowledge right across the board. I'm even finishing a program, on catastrophism that digs those names out again, in a different context. And I do that in all my work. Doesn't mean that I'm just reciting, like a parrot, all their ideas. Yeah. I'm resting on their ideas. I'm modernizing their ideas. I'm adding a mixture of my own thought to it to contemporize it. And mostly importantly, I'm distributing it to people who damn well need, because the greatest solution, starting off with our whole program here, the greatest solution that exists is the past. Yes. Because everything that we face today was already faced by the sages and the mystics and the masters of the past and remedied, right? So wherever there's a problem, there's not only a solution to it, but a way to get to the solution. Yep. So what's happening in today's world is, when people are now having it late, maybe I already said earlier on, we've had the songs, we've had the movies, we've got channels now, love them or hate them, but there's the information right there. So it's not just about seizing. Remember that thing about relationship with time? It's not immediately pushing the button and seizing the solution. These hot points are of us to understand, again, the process of going into the jungle, right? Slashing through the branches, cutting a path through so that we find the solution. America has had solutions too easily dispensed for too long. Yeah. It's not the masculine way, it's the feminine way. Can I have it? I'm a non-heroic mediocrity. Come on. I should be able to buy it at the corner shop, right? I should order it on QVC. Yeah. Instant gratification. What the hell? Yeah. I head down to the jungle, take some jungle juice. I'm enlightened. Deepak, where are you? Tell my story to the world. What the hell? Well, you actually, hold on. You just brought up a really interesting point right there, because I've been having this, when this whole thing took effect, I started to realize, and I started in my messaging and sharing with people, I was like, okay, well, I've done a lot of plant medicine ceremonies. I've done a lot of rituals. I've done a lot of personal development work. And then I started seeing other people and the reactions, and people that I felt, I was surprised by certain people that were having certain reactions that I would have expected different reactions, and other people that I discounted or counted out were actually kind of rising to the moment. And I realized, like, okay, let me get this straight. What was the value of all those plant medicine ceremonies? Whether it's traveling to Peru and doing ayahuasca or working with the shamans, and it's not good or bad. It's neutral. It's all about intention and the actual, that's a whole conversation of itself. But what was the point of all those shamanic initiations and the personal development workshops and the spiritual workshops and all this information that we've learned and taken on? What was the point of all that work, and what's the value of it now? Because now is the moment that all has to come into the fold. Now is where the fruits of our labor
personal development work and all this self-help work and all these things that maybe we've done to fill up the time, maybe, you know. And now is the moment. Now is the moment where real spirituality needs to come at the ready. And so that's an interesting idea, just piggybacking on what you just talked about, because essentially what I hear from you is this convenience culture that we've had, this immediate gratification, this microwavable result kind of thing, where we don't have the ability to stew in our dilemma, to sit in the discomfort, in that void of uncertainty, right? And that's just life. But again, like, so our whole certainty has been shaken up, and now we're dealing with this, like, okay, I don't really know what's going on. What do I do with myself? I think that's how we started this out, and we talked about that for a while. And I think that's ultimately where this comes down to, is what the heck do I do with myself? And I think that's the question a lot of people have on their mind, or maybe it's just subconscious. They're just trying to figure out, okay, what do I do with myself now? And my question, I guess, to you and to all of us is, how do we use this opportunity of uncertainty, this opportunity of discomfort, this opportunity of a potential void? How do we use it to our advantage? And how do we actually be the solution that we seek, to quote Mahatma Gandhi?
And as a personalist, I'm not absolutely discounting the relevance that a person has with this or that experience. That would be violating their will. I want them to value it. And if that experience, right, it's just like going up in a glider. Hey, that was the greatest thing I ever did, you know, even if I never do it again, or diving with the dolphins or whatever it might be. Of course, you're assigning value to that at your time. It's just, I would prefer that people were able to go through the kind of rituals that they do, you know, under a mushroom down in the Amazon at home without intaking anything except a glass of water, right? There's already a temple hidden in a glass of water. There's already a temple in the elements and the light, in relationship with animals, in picking up a leaf, in sitting with your pain in a different way. That is the Western magical tradition. And it's occluded by all the gurus and all the religions and all the priests, right? Everything you can think of. And you can do the experiment, as we said, of looking back in your own life and seeing how you violated time, how you didn't savor your agony and let it become your greatest teacher. You didn't. And by God, if you had, you would not be the same person. So I've been saying it for years about the shadows. They come in all gnarly and horrible and stinky, right? And you banish them. You tell them, go, get thee hence. And in doing so, you make yourself shallow, right? You commit a deep crime to your own self, and you will reap the whirlwind because of it. America is pathologically anti-psychological. It has no relationship with pain at all. It just has, like George Carlin, even in a humorous way, brought this up, right? But the fact that he was right, there is no relationship with pain, just pseudo pain, and taking ourselves to the car wash, right? Taking ourselves to the psychiatrist, which is nothing, amounts to nothing more than a sort of a spring clean, so I can just go back and become part of the abnormal world. Krishnamurti said there is no sanity in adjusting to the abnormal world. Well, yeah, why don't people listen to that? So we're not as modern as we think we are. We're not as advanced as we think we are, psychologically speaking, emotionally speaking, and bioenergetically speaking. Because when I talk about shadow work, I'm always thinking about Wilhelm Reich, who did not use that term. I needed someone like Arthur Yanov or Alexander Lowen and these people. But they did speak about emotional plague, and how that there's not a political paradigm or a political activity that isn't rooted in the emotional plague, which is the armoring, which is the self-denial, which is the cognitive dissonance, which are all choices. Yes, there's Big Brother's boot, and probably 100% of the conspiracy authors that I know and have worked with and are out there, almost 100% of them are always excellent at talking about the boot of Big Brother in the Orwellian sense. Never does anybody say, hey, Big Brother, come put your boot on my neck. We're still, see, so we're not as far advanced as we think we are, even in the movement that's meant to have the greatest solutions, from which I've now practically divorced myself entirely. well, not entirely. Obviously, it would be ridiculous, right? But a lot of my priorities have changed as my outlooks have changed, right? And that's just a personal foible, right? But it's substantiated when you see this thing we're talking about and addressing now, which is everybody is very good and up to speed on telling you where, you know, the external threat is.
Yeah.
And poor old us, we're taxed, we're chemtrailed, we're this, we're that, the other, right? There is not a voice squeaking up about how I want to be enslaved, how I want freedom from freedom, how I want chains of gold rather than chains of iron. But I don't really want any fundamental opening of the doors of the gulag. I just pretend I do. And I'm very elaborate in how I pretend that I do to myself. I've got window dressing. I've got charades. I've got incredible self-deceptiveness to convince myself I'm really interested in self. Sure, I go to church. I'm part of a religion, right? The Totemic Father means everything to me. I'm a socialist. I'm a humanitarian. I think of others, not myself. We need world government. We need this. We need mandatory vaccinations. We need to keep the kids healthy. We never call tyranny tyranny. We never call evil evil. It's he's got a mental defect. He's got to have a microchip put in his brain. Yeah, he had bad parents. Well, he did, but the thing is, it's not going to be a microchip then fixes. You're contradicting. Even they contradict themselves. If you're telling me it's psychology, then it's not a loose wire in your brain neurologically, is it?
Right.
How come you can't get your story right? So we are littered with these contradictions, and it is a painstaking process, right, of eliminating the untrue. That's apophatic deconstructive work. That's at a premium. And then you come upon the truth. As I said, don't just grab the solution, you know, like you grab, you know, a bag of Doritos, right? You go through the process, and that's been sabotaged. All the different ways of education, the New Age movement with its laws of nonsensical, you know, laws of attraction. All of this is to violate, right? It runs parallel. There's good secrets there because it's run to succeed, right? It has to run parallel with the truth. It's mirroring it. And for that, you give them a star. But it's really not authentic. It's not really the authentic thing.
Right.
Because it's speaking to a social self, which you already have to remove that mask to even really live this, move on the Siddhartha road. And then the Siddhartha road leads the way. And those are personalistic, idiosyncratic rules that don't pertain to anybody else. You can't share it. There's no cultism involved. Right? Well, there's not even a priesthood involved. There's only you and your inhale, exhale, baby.
Yeah.
And you're stepping one, hearing that foot, hearing your own footsteps, and then finally the horizon. Finally, what's there tomorrow? So shall it be. I'm here now. I'm present. I don't care what the world is like tomorrow. The world can be. I give the world freedom to be whatever it wants to be tomorrow, but I also give myself the freedom to be exactly what I am right now. And that's the meditation. Not what other people say, not what may or may not happen, not if we fall off the edge of the world, none of that, right? It's be here now.
Yeah.
And that is a very difficult thing. It's extremely easy, but at the same time, it's very difficult. Like the old maxim, you need to know a very great deal to know a very little, and you need to know a very little to know a very great amount. These are paradoxes. That's why the map of the world is insufficient. It doesn't help you along the road. People have made billions out of it, presenting you these A to Zs as if it will. Right? No. Right? A little animal, a little bird, right? A little beam of light can teach you infinite more. The sound of running water, being near the beach. You know this.
Yeah.
Right? The wind through the trees is the teacher. Forget what the human has to say. What they say is a statement about themselves. Blah, blah, blah. This worked for me. Blah, blah, blah. I do this. Right. I know, says Socrates. Have a nice day. I heard you. Great. Yep. Right? That statement, that God, that belief, that tradition, those rites that you've done for 1,000 years, right? And all of those things are idiosyncratic. Why are you trying to sell it on the street to me? It's not a bunch of bananas. Get out of my way. The whole essence of freedom is I make room for you and you make room for me. That's the moral law, right? And you give me room to find out, am I empty or am I full? But if you don't give me any room, I'll never know what I believe and what I am.
Just
I
crowding,
need that space.
just crowding and projecting and just disseminating all this information, all these perspectives, and filling up the void. Just anything we can do to fill up the void with,
which is not a void.
Right.
But we can't know what furniture we've got because everybody else has been piling in to move right on in. Right. And now we're cluttered, and this happens. So then comes along, astrologically, whatever way you want to look at it, moments where there's a fallowness comes along, and it can come from a myriad ways. and it sweeps away, you know, the house. It just burns it down, and it leaves you fallow, and then says, okay, what are you going to do now? And so the art, right, which the Tao, which the Zen and other groups understood nature, that these moments come. We forgot that. So this is a kind of a moment like that. You get a bit of vertigo because the bus is, you know, screeching around the bend, and you go, ah, I'm 2 seconds from death. Yeah, but the mystic is always 2 seconds from death, and he has a relationship with death. The sage is just, take me anytime you want because I am full.
Wow.
I don't have desires. You cannot gain enlightenment as long as there's a single thing you want. You cannot gain enlightenment or illumination if there's a single desire for anything.
Yeah. So in essence, it really doesn't matter what the external, in this case, crisis is. It's just a reflection, or it's an interpretation of what's going on within the individual and how the individual responds or reacts to the perceived situation. And that's just, I keep taking it back to that, and we're kind of on the final leg of this conversation here. And there's still so much that I want to extrapolate here with you. I'm really fascinated with the astrological and the cosmological perspective. And one interesting thing to note that you were mentioning about this kind of clamoring to the external or describing the external, whether that's all the different conspiratorial conversations, that's the political, et cetera, et cetera. It's easy to point at things. And even in this conversation, there was a period where I wanted to point with you to see where your finger was pointing to, because I wanted to describe some of those things that are particularly not news to me, but now are new explorations to me. You know, for example, a lot of this information coming out around the pedophilic and the human trafficking and sex trafficking and child trafficking. Like this is all this, I'm not making this up, obviously. Like this is stuff that's rising up to the masses. These are things that have been going on maybe since the very beginning. Maybe this is what it's all been about underneath everything, you know, from the satanic ritual perspective. These things exist, right? This is becoming more of a conversation in my reality. So part of me wanted to like point to that, but ultimately I think your intuition and your wisdom has been guiding the conversation, not avoiding any of that, but guiding the conversation intuitively to not so much pointing at the problem or trying to over describe the external appearance of things, but pointing back to self-referential perspective. Like, how do we empower ourselves? How do we upgrade our psychology? How do we develop psychological immunity so we're not affected by, you know, what, and this is my own language. I'm just interpreting it, right? You know, essentially, how do we empower ourselves?
The mystic doesn't have a problem. Problems are for other people. The mystic does not have a problem, and he will need to, if he's trying to meet people halfway and transmit that fact, yeah, he can do it in a multiplicity of different ways, because remember, Odin is in some sense also the trickster, right? So the great sages are in one sense also tricksters, and that's a persona that they don because they have to engage with people who are very, very estranged from the truth, you know. And so what happens there at that point is that you have to communicate with the person by sort of going back to basics, you know, taking them back to a place of grounding first, because if they're scattered, they can't hear you in the first place, right? And so there's a calming effect by being around sage-like people, you know, and the things that they do. And what they're trying to do is remind you of the sage within, right? Remind you of your own inherent heroism and strength, you know. And there's an old statement that goes, if you find yourself under attack from very powerful forces, it means that they're seeking you out because you're more powerful than them. Your enemy and the magnitude of that enemy is the mirror to who you are, right? And you just, that's a whole different, you know, component. When it comes to what did you allude to there? Oh yeah, the pedophilia. The question I have on that is that can never be stopped. So I don't think anything that's happening has to do with that. A lot of protestations are made, for that script that's been written for the TV fiasco we've got going on. Never on this planet will ever that stop. It has not stopped since ancient times. You can go back to the bloody Canaanites, whoever, and it certainly won't make a dent of difference now, no matter how many priests, dirty old men that you arrest. This thing, all of the different, for people who know the bigger body of my work, they know that a group called the Black Nobility, which includes a lot of the world's royalty, not all, but most, and includes the College of Cardinals and all of that. That group has been vampiristic, blood-sucking, and child molesting from the year dot. And in fact, as you well know, that's a kind of a satanic ritualistic thing that rules the world. And it's one of the things that the elite use to even seduce the lower henchmen, you see. So you're never going to get beyond that glass ceiling to stop it, which is abysmal to be able to say, but anyone who's really studied the subject, will finally have to concede that fact. All that you'll have is a sort of a Jeffrey Epstein lower level debacle. That is it. It's not going to go any higher because it cannot go any higher. A couple of dirty old men, yeah, okay, they made it, so they were sacrificed, because they're going to be sacrificed because they made it too obvious to the public what they were doing. So that's already breaching, the code. They're already people that will be penalized because they made it too obvious what they were up to. And so they'll suffer, penalization from upstairs. So that is canceled because anything to do with that kind of thing is so quiet, right? That on no account would anything be happening in the governmental movement that would draw attention to it. Because one, that attention will not work. It'll only do a small cleanup. And secondly, that level of conspiracy has always benefited from absolutely keeping people in the not know, keeping them dull like sheep, right? So the conspiracy works in grades. So if you see any shuffling or hustling and bustling and loud histrionics and clashing of cymbals and banging of drums, that's going to be short-lived and will finally fade away because the greatest conspiratorial devices, machinations of the truly Faustian and Machiavellian way have happened when we're asleep. That's their history. That's true conspiracy. And they'll never change that formula. They will never reinvent that wheel. They'll never want, so this can happen. It doesn't rule out a more of a histrionic thing happening, in the timeline. Certainly, we've had world wars, as I said, but still, even given the furore of it, and the spectacle of it, the extravaganzas that they often throw, the real conspiracy moves on like Tolkien's fucking riders through this town, man. You don't even know they're there. Even when you're looking at one, you can't see it. Yeah, it's too sophisticated. It's too quiet, right? It's got you mesmerized. Right? You even look at it and you see something you see angels where devils are, right? That's how powerful that shit is. And the kind of ability to see in the dark there, the world doesn't have. They're completely sacrosanct because the kind of wisdom that you'd need is so great that you'd have probably already come up against them in that pursuit and they'd have already taken you down. Right? So that's canceled. When you really know the depth of it, nothing that happens on the the sort of the foreground of the picture, so to speak, has that much relevance. Even when it can be quite, like good. Yeah. Like, hey, the guy's actually telling you he's an insider or he blew the whistle. Yeah, but even with all of that, it doesn't really make the dent, that it should further up because the whole world system from the time of this, BC period has been set up so that it can't. They use that bloody pyramid, for a reason. You ain't getting upstairs, mate. There's no gate crashing there no matter what you put together. There's no, getting past that ceiling that they put up, no matter how many, Uzis you got. It's just not possible. They got too many tiers, and some of them are completely impossible. But that doesn't make you inactive and say that, no, well, then on the tier that I do exist, I'll bloody make change, all right? Well, that's what I'm talking about, heroism. But at the same time, temper it by knowing, yeah, it still didn't make a dent. They pulled up the ladder. They can restructure the whole of the world's order. But they won't do it because incrementally it's taken so many billions and so much energy of their own people to get to where we are now. They're going to preserve that status quo. You've got to think as they think. So all of this extravaganza, right, and furore, that is temporary and will soon fold up because the greatest triumphs that they've ever got, the greatest victories that they can rack up to their name have been done with our complicity or our ignorance. of the matter.
Yeah. Wow.
But write it down. Take 100 lines. The mystic has no problem.
The mystic has no problem.
Put that over your bed, people listening to us.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's a great way to temper this and to kind of get into the conclusion here of this conversation. And I know we hopped around a lot, and I definitely, I feel like, you mentioned something about scatteredness, and I don't know exactly how, and I'll just be really transparent in this moment, especially with this conversation, because I didn't have everything planned out. I knew that we were going to hop on and just kind of get into things as we have. And I appreciate your level of clarity, because a lot of these concepts, I've been swimming in the swimming pool. I've been swimming through the fish tank, moving through some of this. So I don't know if any of my communication has been a little unfocused or scattered, but I definitely kind of leaned on you. And that's why I had you come on to kind of recapitulate and refocus some of these ideas that I've been trying to kind of trying to structure so I could see clearly. And one of the things you just mentioned now is in support of that, which is, what can you do? Like, once you have all this information and all these different perspectives, what is my work to do ultimately? That's what I want to maybe encourage all of us to find in this conversation. What is my work to do? And I think that's the conversation we should have been having before this. And it's certainly the conversation we should be having now, which is, with all this distraction going on and abstraction going on, what is my work to do?
Well, nobody can tell another what that is. For me, it's do nothing. For me, it's just do nothing. Yeah. Remain stoical. See, everybody's doing too much. That's the whole point I'm making.
Got it. Yeah.
And by the way, when I said that thing about mystics not having a problem, do not translate that as if now he's a psychopath who couldn't care, because psychopaths have no problem. We've done programs on Sage and Psychopath where we've shown the connections, but I just want to make that one point. That does not give people then the idea that a mystic is utterly careless of his environment, right? Mm-hmm. He's still very much part of the Mitwelt. He certainly has a responsibility to that Mitwelt. So I heard how people might be hearing that and say, oh, well then good. Yeah, that's good for me because I can get along, I'll still keep on watching my soaps. I don't have a problem either. That's not what I mean. This is it's a very deep empathic state actually, but we'll have to, that's a hard thing to prove. But again, just let the thought sit in and contemplate it oneself without a lot of noise from Michael and everybody else. The mystic has no problem, right? That is a very, very high level of empathic understanding, which also runs parallel with a kind of deep stoicism and deep detachment. So it's a meditation, and it will take time for that to sink in. But the doing can also be the Alice in Wonderland's kitchen. They're all doing. Throwing around the salt and the pepper, screaming at each other, banging the plates. How do you think the meal's going to come out? That's done by doing. There's a moment in life, also socially, because the Saturn in the Aquarius could be that. There's different other, astrological phenomena that can definitely indicate that. A retrograde could indicate that. But in general, I think that the doing is too much. We're overdoers in this moment. And so there's a new meditation, which is, like Bruce Lee once said, I prepare every morning, like a student at his first class, I prepare a blank mind for the day to write upon. If only, right, we would be guided by that, right, and come back into deep presence, deep relationship with our own pain, as we've discussed, in which you let it be a guide and a tutor, where you do learn from the falling leaf, right? And you become very phenomenologically present. That's kind of a grounding that is needed, And in that, what happens is, when I say that the mystic has no problem, it's because he is so fortified in himself, he is so grounded in himself, and he can call on his daemons and his angels to take the problem from him, to contextualize it, right? He's in touch with the core of the earth. So he has no problem, because how could a man of that great strength have a problem? He can be in a dungeon for 18 years, strapped to a wall. He still has no problem, right? Read Byron's Prisoner of Chillon, right? The poem. There's a different transcendental letting go, which involves not having the problem, which is a mystical process. It's not a psychopath going, well, sure, I've never had a problem because I don't give a fuck about anybody else. I have no care anyway. Let it all happen. I'm all right, Jack. That's not what I mean.
Yep.
There's millions of people like that, right? In fact, many could argue that our whole our whole society has psychopathic traits. Well,
Yep.
these leftists you've been talking about, the loony left, you're getting warm there, all right. Kerry Bolton calls him the psychotic left, and he's totally right. So this kind of comportment that I'm talking about is born in deep fortitude. It's granite, because you're standing there with some heavy duty power that you've awakened, and that is that you're working with. And in that, it's like a bird on a tree with a tiny little grain in its mouth, and it drops and it falls into the ocean, right? Yeah, the mystic has no problem, because he doesn't see himself, right, as a drop in that ocean. He sees the reverse, that he's an ocean in a drop. And his daily meditation is then to become completely aware of that. Then he's got his function and his role in the Mitwelt, right? Because we're Eigenwelt, self, Umwelt, nature, Mitwelt, society. Mitwelt being with others.
Yep.
And in the with world, the mit sign, right?
Yep.
In my duty towards other people, yeah, I've acknowledged that. And so I'm this person for a while. And I develop these skills for a while. But my hold upon them is extremely light. Right?
Yeah.
I can drop it at any time.
Yeah.
And I can, and by dropping it, I return, right, to the still point. And the person who is in touch with that still point, you see, cannot be wavered. It doesn't mean that bad things don't happen to him. Like I said, they could end up boiling you in fucking oil, but they haven't really taken away your essence. And you're processing your shadow, right? Because the body is very much a part of this process as well, right? Because it's one of the things that you're learning from, not just the falling leaf and the beautiful sound of the water. That's all important, but the sound in here, right? There's a sound in here, a voice, an intelligible voice within your own being, speaking to you on a daily basis and offering you that power, not just the muscular power of physical strength, but energetic, bioenergetic strength that the martial artist is working with, the chi or the ki, the prana, the bioenergy, whatever way it works for you to understand. Spiritus, as a matter of fact. So the language besides, there is a deeper intelligence, and we're not connected to that. And that's what our big brother knows. As I've been saying for years, the fact that they know how weak we are, how ungrounded we are, right, how little we know about our biopsyche, the more they can discombobble, they can pull the thread and all the beads just run around the table. But the person who's got it, right, and who stays within the center and cultivates that and is aware of what his inner voice is saying, you see, his somatic intelligence is awakened. That person is very far from somebody who can be messed with on that level.
That's a brilliant point. And man, I could go on another hour or two with you easily, especially now it's opened up a whole new set of Pandora's box into human potential, really, because like ultimately this whole and when I say this situation, I don't mean this literal situation, I mean this situation, like the big that's been unending since the beginning, whether it was the Titanic or before that, since the inception of our country, world history, Operation Paperclip, which you kind of alluded to, right? The whole idea that this is, secret forces or secret agents from different governments shifted over to ours that infiltrated and let people do their own research. But the point of the matter is, we've had controlled opposition to our human potential from day one. And I think there's actually a necessity there from a maybe a cosmological or a spiritual perspective, maybe a God's eye view perspective, because the humans in the ant farm, we can't see, the caterpillar can't envision what the butterfly sees. But if we can get that higher vantage point and perspective, maybe we can see the implicate perfection within within the conspiracy, within the drama, within the friction. So when we're experiencing the dynamic tension or the dynamic instability, we don't freak out. We don't jump on these rabbit hole perspectives that are going doom and gloom or black and white. We actually have a balanced perspective and can see kind of like, hey, there's post-traumatic stress, but there's also post-traumatic growth, right? How do you create a diamond? How do we actually, my experience has been, I can self-voluntarily put myself through resistance and I'm going to grow just like I work out. But it does seem like in life, the times that I've grown the most and evolved the most is when my back was up against the wall, when I had to figure the damn thing out, when my plan wasn't working anymore and it was breaking down and I had to figure out a new plan on the spot. Those seem to be the times where I've grown the most. And apparently spirituality is all about growth, right? It's not about convenience. It's not about just sitting and meditating all day long and just being comfortable and convenient. Everyone keeps telling me that the point of spirituality is about growth and evolution. So maybe there is a point to all of this beyond my own personal preference.
Well, you see, there's always, by being a human being, we have empathy, right? And empathy does reach out naturally. It's called intentionality in philosophy. It's slightly different than the word we mean, because when we say intention, we mean it's a very conscious thing. Intentionality is just body language, tone of voice, eye contact. It's the normal leaning out toward other people. But existentially, what has happened is we have taken refuge in it to escape the voice of the self, right? This is the equation. And as I said, since it's a contract we make with ourselves, we then forget about it and forget we forgot about it. Total dissociation. So when people like myself mention this time and time again, I know that it'll take many years for people to even get the first toehold in what, even those who say, I got it. I'm not stupid. I got it. No, you fucking haven't. And I know that. So you have to reiterate, right? So I just keep it harping, drip feed until, and times like this actually assist, in which people start to realize, like I said, that which was, screamed from the back of the pack now moves up a bit, and people get to grips with these simple truths, you see, and simple U-turns in your own personal life, reorientating back to what you really believe, a bit of centroversion, a bit of introversion, can really make large scale differences in your perspectives, in how you work with other people, how you let them intrude into your existence, right? How you call a spade, and even in career, it will definitely, affect you on multiple levels, and all for the good. So what you've got to do is realize that you are in a living environment. Your world, your cosmos is living. It has your best interests at heart. It never throws you challenges that you cannot overcome, right? And that you have now to get into a different relationship with that, right? There is difficulty doing that. There's millions of escapes, like running to the guru's feet, following the bloody path, or, and all that nonsense. But there are other ways, because in all encounters with those people, you are still part of that encounter. The selfie has been taken from, as you say, the God eye point of view, right? But what we have forgotten in the West is to that level of self-reference. And then unfortunately, when we have it, it's mostly a narcissistic one. Look at me, and all, it all went wrong. There's plenty of self-referencing, but it's of the persona, it's of the social persona, it's exhibitionism, it's I'm the guru, or I'm next to the guru, and all this nonsense. Right? Or it's a service to, I don't think of myself, I think of the public and the good and all. So it's gone wrong, because it's not the true self, right? The emotional plague has got in between that, and you're trying to embolden and window dress this corpse. That's what corporation, it means, a dead thing. And we operate in the world as dead things, not as living, vital things. And as you're quite right, there's more to expound upon this. We do it in the podcasts. We'll have to have you on real soon. As a matter of fact, let's do it. Open to that. Enslaved, we could go over these matters, because
absolutely.
This is the kind of thing I really actually prefer to talk about. I know you talk about some of the unstructuredness of it, but see, I actually prefer this because my other work is so structured. Structured what we do on Enslaved, and that's great, and has to be, because we're doing top drawer stuff there. But this is actually my favorite kind of my preferred way of doing things, actually. But we'll definitely have to have you on, Ronnie. So much thank you for this as well, this opportunity.
Oh, I mean, my pleasure. I mean, just total honor and gratitude for you. And as you know, before we first started connecting a while back and started doing those interviews, and I had really gone deep into your work. I was going through a lot of that underworld, and contending with spiritual matters that weren't well explained to me, or I wasn't really well prepared for, or at least maybe I had a sense of, but I didn't have a roadmap. I didn't have a manual to go through those depressive, existential crisis points. And I think a lot of people are going through that, and particularly the millennial generation, which is a topic in of itself. And I think your work really serves to put pieces together and give a language to experiences and phenomena that has been either politicized, it's been shoved under the rug, it's been given some kind of maybe new age spin on it, which can be helpful temporarily to give you some kind of reprieve, like, oh, okay, like there's something beyond the veil, thank God, because I thought I was going crazy. So at least there's something there. But then when the person wants to go deeper, there's not a lot there other than, like, you know, just be here now, be present, be here now. It's like, well, fuck, man, I'm here, and right here feels a lot like hell, and I'm trying to get over there, and they're telling me heaven's over there. And, you know, so we have these weird kind of ideas that we're trying to break apart to get to the truth. And when I say the truth, I mean practical. Like, what can I do with this thing to actually make my life better? And I think your work has really been one of the foundations and the hallmarks of that in the world of psychology, in the world of philosophy, in the world of the truth movement, making truth practical. And the last thing I want to say, and I didn't bring this up before, but one thing I think this is appropriate to mention, is that your work is a very interesting, it's like you're doing the subtle art of communicating truth without spreading fear. That came up for me yesterday, and I had meant to actually make that a theme, but I think I just want to communicate that before we close out. There's a subtle art to communicating truth without spreading fear, right? Because most of the truth, like whether it's the Alex Jones variety or the David Icke variety, and it's all good. However, there's a carrier wave, there's a vibration that gets carried, particularly through Alex Jones. I mean, you know, that's just his, you know, when you look at a character like that, you also have to take into account the physiology and the body mechanics and the health and those things. Have we put that together? Maybe not. You know, a holistic perspective. I think you, better than most, if not anyone, are able to communicate clearly truth without spreading the fear virus. It's almost like when I hear you, I've heard very uncomfortable truths, but I felt comforted by the truth, if that makes sense.
Yeah. It's definitely not popular, you know, because again of that quick fix thing.
Yeah.
I don't have any solutions like that. I don't have quick fixes. They're all something that will take a lifetime. It's like my lifetime has gone into studying these things. And I've had to be reconciled to the fact that it is a very slow process. Even one of these things that we're looking at is itself pretty much a lifetime of persistent, consistent study, right? And rumination. And I've had to, you know, commit to that and make sure that those distractions were minimized to get what I have to say, you know, and all of that. So yeah, it's not a quick fix. It's not a spinner rack. You know, it's constant polishing. It's constant putting it down again, stepping back, walking around it, you know, rejecting it, you see? And I'm used to that process now. I'm used to what it takes to have this apophatic approach. Not screaming through any megaphones or bashing any tables, you know.
Right.
It's a discussion. It's just like, you know, it's a discussion.
Yeah.
You know, in which everything I know could be wrong. You know, and that's also very frightening. So there is a fear, but it's a healthy fear. It's a white fear. It's you know, a fear in which it's also can release you, because if you're holding the reins very lightly, you know, but you have a great deal of passion, you leave the door open for the other voice to come through, because there's nothing that you're iterating, right, that the other person doesn't ultimately know or intuit inside. Yeah. And so what you're really doing is midwifing the truth forth. Right? It doesn't have your signature on it. There's definitely admixture of one's own consciousness and one's own thought. Yeah. But we stand on the shoulders of giants.
Yeah, totally.
You know, and my God, that'll humble you. You know, and that's why I love delving into the works of great giants. I love it. I will never stop doing it. A lot of my books are dedicated to the great men and women, you see, who inspired me. So yeah, there's admixture of my own thought and quite a lot of it. But the thing is that I would never have got there, would I, if I hadn't dedicated the time. And because I really love this work and I'm passionate about it, I'll give those other writers and give those other thinkers the time that they deserve. Right? I won't just leaf through it, pick out some parts because, this makes me look good, which is a lot of people are doing. It will be far more empathic, far more sincere. And I think people, the people we have as members and everything, and through the years, they are the sincere ones and they love what they're getting. So, but it never ceases being an adventure to me. It never ceases being something that I'm always in a learning process with, because there is so much to learn. But never learn it in a way that is coming from a feeling of lack, right? A feeling of disrespect, irreverence, or fear. That will lead you nowhere. That will lead you to psychosis. Most of the people I've known in my life who I would have said accompanied me on this road, so to speak, have gone off the edge. I watched them melt down year after year after year after year. They start as one thing and they end up something completely different, right?
Yep. I've seen that just in I've seen that just in the food world, the nutrition diet world, because you're dealing with ideologies, and ideology can become somebody's identity very quickly. That's the whole thing in itself. But I've seen that same thing play out. So I can only imagine in your world, in the swimming pool you've been swimming in all these years, how much more intense that can get.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I would say I've known about at least 7 full-blown psychopaths. Can you believe that? That's not an exaggeration.
Yeah.
And since they now know that there's semi-psychopaths out there and then quarter versions, it's actually larger the numbers than we've been told before. It's actually quite a lot, and so you run into them. So I've run into that, and I've run into, people who flaked, who couldn't handle it. And that's the story of my life, actually, so. But I've persisted and continued because I locked myself onto that history elephant, that all the solutions are there, all the thoughts have been thought already, all the solutions have been given, and it's our job to act as kind of librarians or custodians, like preserving it, laying it out in the museum, and having it available. That's all I do. I'm creating a museum of displays, so people walk in, and say, okay, my God, look at this, and they're now. People that never have heard. See, our society's made it that you cannot hear of most of these people. But with the benefit of social media and the internet, we've gone for it. We've gone for it to a very, very, very elaborate, preconceived, methodical, and my work shines with that. People can see it's sincere. And that's all I ask is they do. And then it might inspire them to carry it on,
Yeah, I mean, beautifully expressed and shared. And yeah, I mean, what can I say? Well, what I will say as we conclude is that, if you, for all of you listening, if you're not aware, Michael co-hosts an incredible podcast, which I got to be a guest on a while back. And I'd love to come back on with you and really go any direction we want to go. But it's called the Unslaved Show, the Unslaved Podcast Show. Please let us know where to go for that. I think it's unslaved.com, right?
Yeah. Unslaved.com. My blog is on there.
Okay, right.
And links to other things. We have a premium section. My computer blew up. I've filmed the finish of an idealism series that I'm doing. It's all complete and filmed and everything. It's just not edited yet because computer went down. And a catastrophism, a fantastic program I've got for the premium members coming, and more during the year. And then we got our weekly podcast, me and David. Just come over there and you'll see some amazing stuff that we're doing. Again, it's top drawer stuff, so it's not for everyone.
Yeah, it is. And it's long form, which I appreciate. Just kind of like this is organically, but like you said, like all your stuff is very structured. It's very methodical. It's not rigid. It's just like, it's very structured and very clearly intended on topics that require a lot of extrapolation, and excavation, which again is why I really appreciate you. I feel like you're an archaeologist of history, an archaeologist of rethinking reality. And that's something I just greatly appreciate you for. And just thank you so much for taking the time for caring for the time to be here with all of us today.
Well, I've loved this conversation. And again, it inspires me. It gets things clarified, gets it a little bit more embossed. So that you can stay relevant. It is important to stay relevant with what's going on, but it's also important to stay, like you said, in the larger picture of why you exist, what you're doing here. You should never lose sight of that, because then the forces of evil in the world, they'll win. They'll have complete dominance over your psyche. But Ronnie, mate, thanks a lot. We'll do it again.
My absolute pleasure. Thank you so much, Michael. And thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in once again. And make what you will with this information. Hopefully make it part of your life, and be practical, be centered, be grounded, focus on your immediate reality during these times and all times. And the world out there is going to be the world out there. But one thing you can't control is the world in there. And I think that's the point of all this. So much love and aloha to everybody. And we're in this together. We're going to move through this. And I do believe, just as a final note, I do believe what we're moving into is a better world full of more opportunity and more freedom than ever. Don't know how we're going to get there. Don't know what's going to happen. But I do think that that is the ultimate conclusion of all this. We'll see if we're right. Anyways, much love, everyone. Take care.